Do whatever you like. You're on YouTube now. Go, go, go.
Great, excellent. Well, as we are live, so we've just been discussing what we have been eating. We've got an audience from all around the world, so welcome, welcome, welcome. Whether you are in the morning, the evening, or the afternoon. Now, I am absolutely delighted to be introducing our next two guests. When I was 10 years old, I'm from a big family, and something that we used to do is occasionally the older children would be taken care of by my grandparents. Now, my grandfather is a very keen sailor. And it was a real moment in history for both of us when I watched, at the age of just 10 years old, a person called MacArthur. Now, what was amazing at this point in time was that whenever a woman achieved something, often they would be upheld as the best woman at this, whereas Ellen was the fastest person ever to have circumnavigated the globe single-handedly. It was an extreme sport, and this was back in 2001, I believe. So for me to be able to introduce Clémence and Ilma from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is really exciting. So please join me in a virtual applause. That's like this, by the way. Virtual applause for Clémence and Ilma.
Thank you, Ellen. It's such a pleasure to be here and bring the circular economy message to the young audiences all over the world. And my name is Ilma, and I'm part of the foundation's, Ellen MacArthur Foundation's learning team. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Clem.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to see such a diverse audience today. I'm also from the learning team at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
So it's been really incredible to see the variety of countries you're all dialing in to join us today while we talk about the circular economy. And I think to begin with, we want to make it a bit more interactive. So I'm going to launch a poll that you're going to see in your screens right now. So we want to know, before we kick off, how much do you know about the circular economy? Is it that you never heard of it? Maybe you heard the term, but you're not sure what it means. Maybe you know a little bit about it, or maybe you feel like you're an expert already. So make sure that you answer the poll and we can see the answers coming in. And in the meanwhile, maybe just a little bit about what we will cover today. So we'll talk about the economy. So we are here and we will shortly explain what it actually means, what we mean by economy, and why everything we do is still dependent on nature. And then we'll go a bit deeper into the current economic model in the world today. Why are we in the situation that we are, with all the challenges that we face? And then we will touch upon the solution to the situation, and we'll start by retelling Ellen's story, and then we'll talk about the principles of the circular economy and how it can be applied in the real life. So hopefully you'll feel really inspired and energized by this session. And I'm going to end the poll right now and share the results. And it seems like most of you have kind of heard the term, but you're not entirely sure what it means. And some of you have never really heard of it. So I think we're in the good place to start and tell you a bit more about it. Right. So our job, to be honest, is to talk about economy. And very often when we talk about economy, people's eyes glaze and they're like, what it's all about. It's not really about me. Economy is something out there, but not something that we're a part of. And actually, they couldn't be more wrong, because the economy is something that impacts us every day. Everything that we have, everything that we buy, including our breakfast, the clothes we wear, the things that we use in our daily lives, all the services that we have, like Netflix or energy coming to the house or gas coming to our houses. All of it had to be produced somewhere. It had to come from somewhere. And the processes to make it happen is part of the economy. And then we also, to get them, we need to pay money for that, and we need to earn money. So all of it, all these interconnected processes of earning money, producing services, buying services and products with our money is what constitutes our economy. And all these connections are all over the world. So it's a very interconnected global economic system. However, what we quite often forget, especially living in the cities today, we forget that everything that we have actually comes from nature. And we have lived dependent on nature for thousands and thousands of years. Actually, just before the lockdown started, I had a chance to visit one of the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies in the world, the master trackers of the San Bushman tribe, Kalahari San Bushman tribe, Chohansi, in Namibia. And we were learning how to track animals together with them. And they still have the skill set of hunting animals with bow and arrow. And I brought together with me this little replica. And so this is the quiver, and it's made of an oryx bone, and you can see some arrows in it. And they're made of this hollow wood, and there's a little bow as well. And all of it, perhaps except the arrowheads, which I think is metal, so they must have had metal from the modern world. But apart from that, everything is made from natural materials. And you know, if we threw it somewhere in nature, it would just decompose and become part of it, because that's how we used to live for so many years. However, today we don't have a sense that our things have come from nature. Well, actually they have. So everything that we have on our breakfast or lunch table, all the things from the phone to the cup to the pen, at some point they had to be raw materials extracted from the ground or harvested in nature. And then they were turned into products that we use now. So even if we feel disconnected from nature, nonetheless, everything comes from our environment. And there's another thing that we want to stress about nature that Clem will tell us about.
Yes, absolutely. I think what's very interesting to point out at this point in the discussion is that in nature, things follow a very simple pattern. Things grow, live, reproduce, and then they die. And when things die, they give back a lot of nutrients to the soil so that things can grow again. And a great example of that is the dandelion. So I managed to find what's left of a dandelion here because it's almost the end of the season.
Yeah, it's the end of their season. Incredible. Yeah. I found it.
I found the remaining of one. And so what's really interesting about this plant is that at the end of its life, the petals turn into these really wispy bristles, and they catch the wind very easily. And what it does is it spreads its seeds further away in nature so that it can grow again. And the seed is full of the remaining proteins and nutrients that it will need to grow a new plant. And so what we want to share by this is that in nature, there is no such thing as waste. And when you think about it, it's really genius because the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and it has figured out this really intricate way of making everything around us run really smoothly.
So indeed, there is no waste. There is no concept of waste in nature. Everything becomes food or a resource for something else. And yet the way we live in the world today doesn't follow this pattern. It's actually very different. And before I go into the story, how we came to the point where we are right now and the events that led to it, I just want to say that we really want you to interact with us by using the chat window. And if you have any questions and you're watching this on Zoom, please type in the questions in the chat, and we have our colleague with us who can answer these questions in the chat, or we can bring it into the live air as well and answer it on the screen. So let's talk about how did this all happen? Why did for hundreds and thousands of years we were so dependent on nature? And then how did we lose track and connection with it? So I'm going to share a few slides just to illustrate the story that we're going to share. So this story takes us back to the Industrial Revolution, which happened in the middle of 18th century. So at the time, we invented new processes to create things. At the time, we had the abundant labor, so human labor, which was very cheap. And we had so many different resources that were so cheap and infinite. And energy to power up all these manufacturing plants was very abundant and cheap as well. And then we kept creating new ways of producing and manufacturing more and more products. And once these products were created, we needed to sell more and more products. So we pioneered new methods to advertise and persuade people that they needed to buy more and that they needed to dispose of the ones that they found no use of, or that got old or turned out of fashion, or maybe there's simply a better replacement. And this way of operating in the society where we extract resources from the ground, we turn them into the incredible things that we use in our everyday life, and thus creating waste. This linear model is the way that the world operates to this day. So here you see on the screen the simple graph illustrating that. So we get resources on one end, we turn them into products, and then it becomes waste and we throw it away at the end. Take, make, waste linear model. And we have to recognize that this way of operating in the economy has brought great abundance and prosperity to so many things. And you know, we're so lucky today. We have so many incredible things in our daily life. And if we want anything, it's so fast to get it. We just order it online and it reaches our door the same day or the next day or in a few days' time. So everything is immediate and everything is relatively really cheap. But we know that there are a lot of dire consequences of the way we operate on the global scale. And the first thing to say is actually our system is very inefficient. Like, think about cars. How many of you have cars? I'm sure that many of you in your family and family members have cars. And yet our research has shown that a car on average is left unused 92% of the time. So if we have 24 hours a day, it's used less than 10% of the time. So it's a very short amount of time. Or let's say if we look at the buildings here in Europe, the buildings, especially office buildings, they're left empty for 50 or 60% of the time. And that is extremely wasteful. And you know, especially during the current pandemic, both cars and buildings are just standing there being unused. So all the resources, all the labor, all the energy that was used to produce these things, to build these things, is actually wasted. And then, of course, there are other effects that are much more harmful to our environment. Our other research has shown that by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the oceans. And this is a staggering statistic, and we all are very much aware of the plastic issue, especially when we think about the fact that the recycling symbol, if you know the recycling symbol, the 3 arrows going in a triangle, it has been around for 4 decades, so basically 40 years. And yet today, only 14% of all the plastic waste gets recycled, meaning that the remaining 86% of all the plastic that we throw away ends up in landfills or gets incinerated or leaks into our nature, thus polluting our rivers, polluting our forests, our soil, our oceans. So that's plastic, and many of us are aware of plastics. But how many of us are aware of, let's say, fashion and clothes? And this is probably the most staggering statistic, is that a truckload full of clothes is landfilled or incinerated every single second. So actually, for those of you who are really good at math, I want to ask you a question. We've been having this webinar for 18 minutes now. So since the beginning of the webinar, how many truckloads of clothing have been landfilled or incinerated within these 18 minutes? So calculate and post your answers in the chat and let's see what we get. But this is just incredible. Yeah, 1,800, someone is saying. I mean, it's astonishing. That's how many trucks, and you know, it's like a big truck, and all the unused clothes, they just get thrown away. So think about all the materials that get into it. And what it means is that we don't use clothes as much as we can. And I can see a lot of people counting really well. Yes, 1,800 trucks. And then another effect is food. We know about wastefulness of food and how much food is wasted. But actually 1/3 of all food produced globally is wasted before it's our tables. So the food production system itself is incredibly wasteful. And when we think about the fact that in so many parts of the world there are shortages of food, it's just really hard to comprehend why are we wasting so much when there are shortages somewhere else. And then, you know, thinking about the natural systems, we are all aware about the wildlife populations falling down and so many species going extinct, which is really heartbreaking. And of course, the climate change. And I want to pause a little bit and just say something about the climate change, is that when we think about how we can reduce our carbon emissions, very often we talk about energy. We say we need to become more energy efficient and we need to transition to renewable energy. However, we published another paper last year that shows that if we want to reduce our carbon emissions, our current carbon emissions can be reduced by 55% by renewable energy. But the remaining 45% is about how we make and produce things. In other words, if we don't change our production, our manufacturing systems, we will not be able to eliminate the carbon emission at the rate at which is required to stay under the Paris Agreement 1.5 increase in temperature. So that's the current system. And it's still in the world today. It's still how everything operates in today. It's very inefficient. It's very wasteful. It, you know, as we saw with food, with plastic, with fashion, so much of it is wasted. And also it has very negative environmental impacts. And while it has given us such a great abundance of things, we need to rethink, redesign how we operate in the world today. And I'm going to pause and allow Clem to tell the story of Ellen and lead us to the solution, how we can do things differently.
Thank you, Ilma. That was a very good introduction. I think it is important at this point to give a bit of background on maybe Ellen herself, although Ella has told a little bit about that already, and also about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in general. So a little backstory: in 2005, at the age of 28, Ellen MacArthur became the fastest person to sail single-handed around the world. So her voyage lasted 71 days and covered over 27,000 miles. So that's about 43,000 kilometers. It is a lot. And for this, she needed to carry everything she needed with her for over 2 months. So that means food, fuel, clothes, but also toilet roll and toothpaste. And so in order to break the world record, she needed her sailing boat to stay rather lightweight, and she had to manage these precious, finite resources down to the last drop of diesel and the last packet of food. So Ellen came back from this experience with new insight into the way the world and our economy work. She realized that it is a place of interlocking cycles and finite resources, where just like on her sailing boat, the decisions we make today affect what is left for tomorrow. And so she started to think about a new way of seeing the world's economic system, not as something that is linear, but as something that is circular, where everything comes back around. And soon enough, Ellen quit her solo sailing career, and she started talking to chief executives, experts, scientists, and economists to really understand just how our global economy works. In 2010, so almost 10 years ago, Ellen founded the Ellen MacArthur Foundation with a global mission to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So in essence, the circular economy is the opposite of the linear economy. Rather than taking, making, wasting, it's an economy that's restorative and regenerative by design. It's an economy that can really, sorry, that can really run on the long term. And it is based on three main principles. The first one being design out waste and pollution. The second is keep products and materials in use for as long as possible at their highest value possible in the economy. And the last one is to regenerate natural systems. So we're now going to talk a little bit more about these principles, but more importantly, we're going to give you more concrete examples. I think you're still muted, Ilma.
Yes. So how do these principles actually look like in practice, and what do they actually mean? So starting with the first one, designing out waste and pollution. So the metaphor I would like to use here is that you can't unscramble the omelette, right? So once you've put eggs into the omelette, you can't undo it. In other words, the way we decide to design things and we can't undo it once the thing is made. So what we're trying to say is that a lot of wastefulness and polluting effects of the things and the systems that we have in our economy today is because we design them to be this way. Perhaps unintentionally, but that's the result. The good news about it is that we actually can redesign it and think about the wastefulness and pollution and design it out. So make the decisions at the very creation of the product stage, how to make it not polluting and how to make sure that it can last for as long as possible. And one example about perhaps one of the most wasteful materials, plastic, and we all know that polystyrene plastic that usually, it's bulky, it's white, and if we buy any technical equipment, the box will arrive with a polystyrene wrapped around that piece of equipment that we need. It's a vacuum cleaner or a laptop. But then there's nothing we can do with this plastic. We need to throw it away. It gets wasted, and very often, as I said before, it leaks into natural systems. So what could be a solution to that? So these two guys you can see at the bottom, they came up with the solution, realizing that if you take the byproducts of the agricultural processes, basically, when you grow food, there are certain byproducts you get. They are considered waste. But if you feed that to mushrooms, these mushrooms can be grown into certain shapes and forms. So everything that you see here on the screen, the lamps, the packaging for glass, the packaging for glasses, and even the words "we grew this" headline, everything is grown out of mushrooms. Which means that then you can, once you receive a product that you need in mycelium packaging and ecovative packaging, you can safely compost it at home and it goes back to the natural system. So that's one example how you can design out waste and pollution. Another example
that I personally really like is Uhu. Uhu's founders have collaborated for a long time with chemists, engineers, and designers in order to create a soluble and edible alternative to single-use packaging. So they created an edible membrane that is made from seaweed that you can see on the slide right now. And it contains 1 mouthful of water. So you can just put it in your mouth, it will dissolve, and you will drink the water that is inside. So this has already been trialed as a replacement for plastic bottles at marathons and festivals. And now the team is trialing new applications of this product to ideally replace single-use sachets. So for example, little ketchup sachets that you get at restaurants. And this could be used at mass events or even for toiletries in hotels. So what I really like about this, it really is about redesigning a packaging. It's about innovation. And we see really clearly that waste and pollution is designed out of the product altogether. And that even if the product isn't dissolved or eaten, it will naturally biodegrade in 4 to 6 weeks. So it really is an interesting product.
And what I really like about these two examples, Clem, actually, that they're both inspired by nature, and they both draw their inspiration and innovation from the nature and processes that we see in nature. Either, as you said, the seaweed packaging or the mushrooms grown into packaging. And Cherry in chat is agreeing that Uhu packagings are used in the matter of marathons as well. And here again, I would like to pause and create a little interactive moment. And when we speak about designing things, so the question that I have for you, and I'm going to launch a poll, and it relates very often to what we see, for instance, again, going back to the example of packaging. So a lot of companies, they say, oh, we collected a lot of waste ocean pollute, let's say from ocean that pollutes oceans, so like ocean rescued plastic, and we turn it into new products, or they turn it into shoes, or in all sorts of things. Do you think that has place in the circular economy? Do you think that the waste should be designed out from the very beginning? So please fill in the poll, and we're really curious to see what you have to say about this. And the thing is that right now, the way the systems are operating, it is extremely wasteful. And we need to find ways to deal with the current waste that comes in. We need to find ways to, have better and more efficient recycling systems, perhaps, to make sure that we can recycle it more and more. I'm gonna end poll right now and share the results. I know that some of you haven't answered yet, but so we have a few more answers for designing from waste. And here's why we would very strongly emphasize that we design out waste first. So when we try to design from waste, when we take something that, we found on the streets, on the beaches, or perhaps we took from some companies and that have produced things and therefore have waste as a result, and then we create them into new things. It's basically like, imagine having a bathtub and you have the tap opened, and then you take a little spoon and you try to prevent that bathtub from overflowing with a little spoon. But if we want to prevent it from overflowing, if we want the trash not to overflow our environment, we need to close the tap. No matter what we do with a spoon, it won't be effective enough. And therefore, we say that we need to go to the source. We need to go to the root. We need to close the tap. So we need to rethink how things are designed and make sure that they're designed in a way that they don't become waste, they don't reach the landfill, they don't get incinerated.
Exactly, yeah. So this was the first principle of the circular economy. The second principle is to keep products and materials in use in the economy. So what it means is that a circular economy favors activities that preserve value in the form of either energy, labor, or material. That means that we need to design for durability, modularity, reuse, remanufacture, and then as a last resort, recycling. That designing this way enables us to keep products, components, and materials circulating in the economy for longer before it actually becomes waste. And ideally, it would never become waste, just like in nature. So a good example of that is a company called Jared Street. What they did, or what they based their company on, is the fact that every year we throw away more than 15 million kilograms of headphones. So that is a lot of headphones that we throw away. And so it was absolutely unacceptable to these two Dutch music lovers who really aimed to redesign the whole music and headphone experience. What they did is they provided a set of headphones on a leasing basis rather than selling. And the main consequence of that is that they really had to think about their product. And they've ended up designing their headphones to be extremely modular so that parts can be taken out and replaced if they're broken, for example. But parts can also be upgraded and they can keep being on trend, for example. And then they can get these pieces back and reuse them or refurbish them or even recycle them into new products. So they keep as much of the material and as many of the components as possible. And yeah, so this is a first example, and then Ilma is going to tell you about another one.
With another example, we're going back to fashion. And I have the same t-shirt, just like he has in the picture. And this is the company called T-Mill and their brand called Rapa Nui. And what I really like about them is that they have this little label, you know, when you have the little label on the items of clothing, but this label says that you can free post this t-shirt back to the factory and get up to 5 credits for your next £5 credit for your next purchase. And there's the little QR code that allows you to scan it and find the address and then post this t-shirt. So when I'm tired of this t-shirt, or hopefully I won't get tired, but when it's too old and too worn out and I want to return it, I can post it back to Rapa Nui. And then they will take this t-shirt, weave it together with new cotton, create new t-shirts. So what they do is basically make sure that none of their t-shirts and other jumpers and other cotton products never reach landfill. So they created a system that allows their customers to easily return the t-shirts back to them, therefore providing them with material to create new t-shirts, but also making sure that what they produce don't get wasted, don't reach landfill, or don't get incinerated. So that's another really innovative way to do that. And we also have a question for you that we would like you to answer in the chat box. Clem?
Yes, absolutely. So we'd like to know, would you ever rent headphones, or would you ever rent a dress or a shirt? And even further than that, have you ever rented anything like this, like we just presented? So let us know in the comments. And again, this is a good moment to remind you that we really want this to be interactive. We have the chat open so we can see everything that you're writing in there. And Anna is also in the chat and she can answer your questions. So please write down anything you have to say in the chat.
And Linal is the only is the only person so far saying that she has rented. Maybe you could say what you have rented. So I think this is where we as customers and our perceptions come in. So I wonder, if you haven't rented, I wonder if you would be interested in renting maybe a dress, or, you know, or headphones, or maybe even a phone. And my second question, and related to relation to that, is whether you would consider buying a used item. So let's see what people say. People rent their wedding dresses. Indeed, usually special occasion wear is something that you perhaps don't want to spend a lot of money on, rather than, so it would make sense that you could just rent it for one occasion. Never rent it. I would not rent, I would buy it. Joseph says that he wouldn't rent, but that he would only buy. And I think, so what's wrong with an item when it is rented, or what's wrong with an item when it's not new? Why do we have the perception that everything that we have needs to be new? And if you think that, you know, it's not okay for us to use things that have been used by others, think about going to a restaurant, or think about sleeping in a hotel. Like the bed sheets that we have, or the cutlery and the plates in the restaurant, they have been used by many, many others. Yet we never question that, they would be unclean or they would not be okay for us to use, because we trust the processes in place that make it good for us to use. So it's all the matter of perception. And some people say that, yes, Clem?
I was going to say, it's very interesting to see the chat. There's a lot of very different answers. Some people say they have never rented and would not rent anything like that. And others say that they donate clothes, they buy secondhand, that most of their clothes are from secondhand shops. So it's very interesting to see also the different answers.
Right. So hopefully that what you're hearing today will inspire you perhaps to consider what you haven't considered before. But let's move on to principle 3.
Yes. So the third and last principle is regenerate natural systems. So it is usually the principle that is a bit further away from what we can conceptualize easily around us. But hopefully with these examples, it will make more sense. So like we discussed at the beginning of this session, is that in nature, there is no concept of waste. Everything is food for something else. When a leaf falls from a tree, it feeds the forest. And what we would like to do is not only do less bad, which would be the 2 first principles, but we also want to do more good. And so by returning these really valuable nutrients to the soil and to the ecosystems, then we can really enhance natural resources. And again, it's good to repeat it a lot. Everything that we have, everything that we touch, our laptops, our phones, our clothes, come from natural resources. So it really is important to take care of this aspect of life as well. A very good example of this principle is called Balbo Group. So Leontino Balbo is an agronomist in Brazil. And when he took over the family farm of sugarcane production, they were spending a lot of money on fertilizers and pesticides in order to grow their crops, because the soil had degraded so much over time. But he really was shocked by the amount of waste generated and chemicals used in the production of sugarcane. So what he decided to do was to rethink the business, rethink the way they do things. And one day he was walking in the forest near his crops, and he realized that all of the insects that were attacking his crops were absolutely not harming any of the plants in the forest. So this led him to really taking in and learning from the wisdom of the natural system or ecosystems. And he ended up shifting his entire business to regenerative agriculture. So what he did was bring nature back into his business, in his crops. He brought different species of plants. He brought trees closer to his crops. He brought insects back. And what he realized, which is very important, I think, is that if you take care of the right conditions, in this case, the soil and the interconnection of species, the plants take care of themselves. So by doing that, he managed to completely eliminate waste, pollution, but also he managed to regenerate natural ecosystems to do more good, not just less bad.
And another example that we have here actually comes from the built environment. And you may not know that, but one of the resources that we are running out globally is actually sand, because sand is it's something that we use as part of cement that we use to build our buildings. And especially the building industry is so wasteful, because when we demolish the building, we basically just waste everything that we use to create this building. So Venlo, a city in Amsterdam, I think about 10 or 13 years ago, they decided that all new buildings in their city will be built using cradle-to-cradle principles. So cradle-to-cradle thinking is one of the schools of thought that influence the circular economy thinking as well. And it basically thinks about how we can design things, thinking about the end of life of that thing, a product, or in this case, building, from the very beginning. So we consider what will happen to it when we don't need it any longer. So in the case of buildings, and this is their city hall, so they built it in a way that when its time is up, they can disassemble and reuse different parts and materials and build other things out of it. But most interestingly about this building, so they really thought about different systems that they have in this building. Well, first of all the greenery you see, and they also have a greenhouse inside. So it helps to purify the indoor and outdoor air around the building. So actually the building doesn't add to the air pollution, but it makes it better. They also thought about the water system and how they can maintain the rainfall water and use it for, as a gray water for bathrooms. They also thought about renewable energy. And first of all, they made it really efficient, the way they use the energy within the building, but they also produce their own energy with solar panels. And you can see the solar panels on the left side on the top. And they actually are able to generate 50% of all the energy that they need for this building, just by the building itself. And that is such a great example how an innovative way can, we can contribute to the environment being better around us. In this case, the air quality improving rather than making it worse or just maintaining the status quo. So these three principles, designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems, is actually something that we would love you to take away and, keep in mind when you go about your life, and one day when you choose your professional lives, that it underpins all your activities and all your choices at work. But if we were to think about how does circular economy actually apply and operate in the world, because we talked about the economy and that there are all these different flows and materials. So how does circular economy thinking help us organize these materials? So here we have something like a butterfly diagram. It's a simplified butterfly diagram because you see two circles, one on the left and one on the right, and they're a bit like the butterfly wings. So with circular economy, the very first thing we encourage is to think differently about the technical cycle and biological cycle. And when it comes to technical cycles, so what we mean by that is that all the materials and all the things that we would consider as waste, as rubbish, if it landed in the natural system and it cannot safely decompose, then it needs to remain as part of this technical economy and continuously circulate, thus never reaching landfill, never reaching incineration. And then on the biological cycle, we want to make sure that things like food waste actually do return to nature and can be safely reintegrated and the nutrients return back to soil. And let me give you an example. And one of them is, a phone, an iPhone. So in the middle of the right circle, you see a piece of gold, and all sorts of precious metals need to be extracted from the earth. And then we use them in various components like microchips and the like. And then these end up in the phone like that. So all the resources, all the labor, all the energy that went into creating this phone. So the first question is, how can we make sure that we use it for as long as possible? How can we make sure that, first of all, we can repair it easily if something happened to it? So can we have repair manuals? Can we have easily accessible spare parts so that we can do it ourselves? Or that we have little repair shops, perhaps at convenience, very closely to us. The second question is, how can we make sure that we use it for as long as possible? Maybe if I don't need it anymore, maybe I can give it to a family member. Maybe I can give it to a friend. Maybe I can resell it. Maybe there's a company who can resell it in another market, in another country. But to make sure that we use it for as long as possible. And then if something happens within the phone, maybe it's one part that got broken. But then if we could return it to the manufacturer, they could take it apart and they could replace the broken part and then reassemble, and it will be as good as new. And there would be so many other parts that were saved, and therefore the resources that were used for them would be saved as well. And then at the very last step, it could be turned into the materials, into the metal, plastic, glass, that has been used to make it. And then these materials could be turned into new things yet again. So that's what we want to see with every single item that we have in the world. Maybe not today, but as soon as possible. And then if we look at the biological cycle, so let's say if we have a food product like an orange. So first of all, we want to make sure that it's grown in a regenerative way. As Clem was saying, we want to make sure that it's grown in a way that actually enhances the quality of the soil, of water, and all the other systems in nature. Second of all, we want to make sure that it doesn't grow on the other side of the world. You know, like I go to supermarket in London, and the only apples that are available are the ones that come from New Zealand. That's as far as it can get for me to get apples on my table. And it's not that easy to find the ones that are produced locally. I think they're out of the season right now. So think about where it's grown. But then once when you consume the apple or you consume the orange, you're left with a peel. So how can we make sure this peel doesn't end up in the general landfill, but actually can be returned back to soil? And that's all the nutrients get returned back to soil. Or maybe there are innovative ways to deal with it. For instance, there is this company called Orange Fibers that turn these orange peels into leather, vegan leather that can be used for, you know, all sorts of clothing or apparel or accessory items. And then another thing that what we could do is to use it for anaerobic digestion. So basically it's taking the food waste and putting into this tank with no oxygen. And then the microorganisms break it down to the very small level, and then it can be used as a fertilizer, and we also get the biogas that can be used as fuel. So this is how we encourage you to think about the biological cycle. So this is actually the summary, the essence of the circular economy that we wanted to share with you today. And I can see a lot of comments happening, a lot of coming in through the chat as well. And there were also a couple of questions, and I think I just need to go back to the slide. Exactly. So there was one question that I saw from the questions about the COVID-19 crisis and about circular economy and its place coming out. Well, actually, we are at Ellen MacArthur Foundation have a very strong view that now especially is the time to make sure that we build back better, that as the economy recovers coming out of COVID-19, we think about circular economy and we bring the circular economy principles. And we have a couple examples, very concrete examples in terms of what this crisis has shown us and how circular economy principles could be applied. So one of them is the ventilators and all the medical equipment in the hospitals and the fact that we had such big shortages. If our current system was operating under the circular economy principles, first of all, a lot of things that we already have in hospitals could be easily repaired and there would be no shortage of spare parts, which was one of the situations faced in hospitals around the world. Second of all, factories producing various equipment could very easily change what they're producing and reorient themselves to produce what's needed, in this case, the ventilators. So as you see, the circular economy principle to create things that can be easily repaired, easily disassembled, and create into something new would have been really helpful in this case. When it comes to biological cycle, let's think about the food and the fact that, you know, very quickly we noticed the food, not shortages, but the food system has been affected. And at least here in the UK, very quickly we saw a lot of let's say little new food collaborations coming up, providing local food from the farms around the cities back to the cities, back to the people that need them, because what we had in the supermarkets was sometimes not even accessible, because, you know, we couldn't just go out and buy things, and online was very hardly available. So these are just a few examples how if we had more local, more diverse food systems grown regeneratively, or if we have systems in place that can repair and disassemble and reassemble things much easier, could have been much more beneficial in the current crisis. So we definitely need to think about circular economy coming out of that. Do we have any more questions?
Well, we have a few comments. I think maybe from my perspective, I totally agree with what you just said. We are facing, you know, a pandemic, a health crisis. But we are also facing a climate crisis, and unfortunately, that might just be what we needed to really take action. But we've seen that we can take action, and we can actually change things for the better in a very short amount of time. And I think that's sort of the main message here, is that the audience that we have today is still rather young, or has can have a lot of influence. You can influence your friends, your family. You can talk to them about you know, how we can change this world and innovate, and not take what we have for granted, or for something that is something that should stay like this in the longer term. We've seen some really nice things in the comment, Ilma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I'm just gonna put on one more slide up because there are more questions coming in, and our time is running out. So just to say that if you want to continue exploring the topic, we welcome to visit our website and also follow our social media platforms, because there is so much great content being created there. And you can explore Learning Hub, our case studies and publications, and learn more about circular economy. And as a closing sentiment, so there are a couple of things that I would like to say, and I think it's particularly essential that the young generation is the one that is about to enter the workforce and, you know, start thinking and creating things, that you do that with a circular economy in mind, because we need so much of creativity and diversity to create and think of all these new solutions about how we operate in our daily lives, what kind of products we use, how we use them, and where they end up at the end of life. How can we make sure that they never reach the landfill, they never get incinerated, and whatever we do always enhances the natural systems. And these three principles, designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems, and also the making distinct the things from biological cycle and things in the technical cycle. These are the things that we would like you to take away and think about when you continue in your life, because yeah, we need all the creativity, all the cool, great ideas that we can get.
All right. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. What's been brilliant from this end is that we have just seen the chats blowing up, and as well as the chats that we've got on the page here, our staff sort of operational chat is also absolutely buzzing. It's so clear everyone's inspired. So Clémence and Ilma, thank you so much for giving your time and for being such great educators who right from the get-go, everything was so engaging and has given us so much to think about. So thank you very much for those. You'll see on the slide that you're being directed to a live stream. So on our website, we now have Shona MacArthur. Now this is going to be a bit in contrast. Circular economy is very practical. It's looking very much at the problems face to face, whereas the arts, how on earth are the arts challenging the way of doing things currently, and how does it hold power? Well, Shona MacArthur is the CEO of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is the biggest theatre festival in the entire world. And she has very generously given her time, and we're going to have a Q&A with her as well. So if you could please go to the live stream now, that would be fantastic. It's in the Zoom chat, that link. And yeah, just I'm sure everybody, we can't see you, but we're just going to give another huge round of applause for that phenomenal session. And remember, do keep in touch with us and hang out in the tea rooms after, because I'm sure you've got lots of questions and are really inspired.